So I'm going to go ahead and make a video of converting a smoker into a powder coating oven. There are a bunch of these already online, and there's one guy who goes in great detail about how he converted it and changed added the insulation and made it able to get up to heat. There were several questions I had while putting it together, so I thought I would put together this video to try to address some of those things that I didn't quite see in some of the other videos. Also, I could not find the smoker that he used. He used a Cuisinart, and it is a double-walled smoker, so that definitely makes a difference. So what I did was I did a bunch of research on the current smokers out there. The Masterbuilt is really the one you're going to find most often for sale. So I was trying to do this on the cheap as much as possible, not spend a ton of money. So I did a bunch of research, looked on Amazon, looked on eBay, looked on Marketplace, Facebook, and I was looking for some kind of smoker. I looked on Facebook. There are some for sale that are under $100, which actually isn't that much of a discount for it's, they say it's a couple times used, but I didn't want any kind of meat smell or anything like that. I didn't want to deal with the grease inside and all the other stuff, because this does need to get up to about 400 or ideally 425 to 450 for powder coating and outgassing and things like that. So I wanted to get something that's new. And like I said, I went through and I did a bunch of research. Masterbuilt is really the one you're going to find, at least right now, that is readily available and pretty inexpensive. I checked Walmart and all those other places I just mentioned, and I was able to find this on Amazon actually for about $110 or $115, I think it was. And I'll tell you the model number in a second. I kind of just had to just make a big decision about, because there are some 40-inch versions of some of these smokers, especially the Masterbuilt, and then there are 30-inch versions, and I'll just also describe what that means a little bit more, because it's very vague. Whenever they say that, it's hard to understand exactly, are they referring to including the legs, or are they including the whole thing? Where within the smoker are they including that? And the reason why that was important in my situation is because I'm restoring an old Jeep, and I have things like the steering collar or column and a couple of the other parts that are about 2 feet long. And so if you're thinking about hanging the whatever it is that you're going to powder coat inside of the smoker, it needs to be tall enough to be able to accept it. You don't want the bottom of it too close to the grill, because then it's going to get too hot, whereas the rest of it will not get hot enough, or the bottom will get over cured. So I wanted to make sure it was tall enough. I went ahead. The 40 inches are not readily available. Also, something to note and pay, I guess, some attention to is that the 40-inch that I saw online were only, I think it was 800 watts or something like that. The heating element was something like 800, far less than the 1200 or 1500 you're going to see in a lot of other models. So that is really important. Also, those are digital ones, meaning that there is, I believe, the way, there's a control panel on the top, and you can set the heat. Smokers are made to smoke meat, so they're getting up to 250 and I think even 300, but I think beyond that you're going to have a hard time trying to find. I'm not sure you can actually set it for 400 and have it actually get up to 400. Maybe you can, I don't know. I had some big concerns about that, because nobody ever talks about getting it that hot, and with only an 800 watt or 700 watt, whatever it is, heating element, I was not sure that it was going to do that. And it's also bigger than this one. This is I think they would refer it to as a 30-inch model, although this particular model, they don't say it's a 30-inch model. Some of the other ones I think are a little bit different. But also those digital ones, so if you have issues with that, then you're going to have to maybe even disconnect the thermostat, because it's an automatic thermostat in some of those. And I didn't want to have to deal with all that. I wanted something more basic. So I went ahead and got this one. Again, this one, you can consider it a 30-inch model, but it's not even 30 inches at that. And if you're doing a 2-foot part, then you're going to have some issues with fitting it in there. And I'll explain that a little bit more in a minute. So looking at this 30-inch model, and I'll go over the what this is exactly. Again, I got this on Amazon. It was about $110. And this is model number because this is probably a discontinued model or something like that, which is why it was so inexpensive. This is a MB 200 77618. That's 618 at the end. I found as I was going through these is the important thing on the model number. Not that you necessarily want this one, but again, this is one of the 30-inch models. It was only about $110. You can find them actually in a lot of different places. Another reason why, and paying attention to, first off, it's analog. So you can kind of see, I'll do a couple of close-ups. That duct tape is not permanent, so don't worry about that. So it's an analog, so it's very basic. In fact, the thermostat that's connected inside there is not even connected up to the thermometer up at the top there. So it's relatively easy to manage and modify as needed. What I really liked about this one, in addition to it being analog and just very basic, because I'm only going to be keeping it at 400 for 10, 15, 20 minutes, whatever I'm curing at the time, I can pretty easily manage the temperature by myself without having to work something up. I mean, there are thermostats I can add in there and things like that, but that might be a mod for a different time. So what also about this one is it's an 1800 watt, at least it's billed as an 1800 watt heating element. And so that was also big. So I figured I could get to the 400 pretty easily with just this one by itself without having to buy an additional, because you can get an 1800 or 1500 watt heating element for $35, $40, $45 somewhere in there. I did a little research. I thought about, well, maybe if I get the 40-inch grill smoker, then I can just replace the heating element if it doesn't work out, and I can also plan to cut all the wires or do that. It's hard to tell what you're able to modify with some of these things. So again, I went with this one, which is a little bit smaller than that one. This is again the 30-inch model, because it already had it was analog. I knew I was going to be able to modify it as needed for the temperature, and then also because it has an 1800 watt element. So a little bit about what I have done so far. So again, this is not permanent. I basically have a cardboard box as a shroud. So a couple things about this particular one, and it may be for all the Masterbuilts, I don't know. Maybe the 40-inch are double-walled. The Cuisinart, and I will put a link in the description to the guy that used the Cuisinart one, and I'm not even sure how long ago it was. It was double-walled. And so what he basically did was took apart the walls and inserted fiberglass insulation. I think just standard insulation like this over here, just the rolls. He just took some thin little layers, grabbed some thin layers, and just put it inside the cavities and then sealed up those walls back up. And then he was able to get it up to temperature in a reasonably quick time, so that worked out really well for him. Again, he also had an analog set up, and also he said his was something like 1500 watts. But he was talking about how it was not getting much up over 400, or it seemed, based on the description and everything and some of the other videos I've watched, that you really do need a 1200 plus type watt oven. Maybe that's not the case, but that's the impression I got. Again, the reason why I chose this one instead of the 40-inch models, or one of the other models that was only 700 or 800 watts. First off, when I unboxed this, I knew I was going to come and run into trouble. So I have this one actually going right now, and I'll talk about that for a few minutes when I get a chance. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up. You kind of see I have a part in there right now that I'm just using. So what I did was, and you can kind of see, it's pretty hot in there, so I'm not going to touch all the stuff, but if you look inside there, these are single walls. They're very thin. When I first hooked it up, it was only able, I cranked up the thing all the way, and it was only getting up to like 250 to 300, it seemed like. It was losing a ton of heat, and the walls were really, really hot. Again, it's just a single, it's super thin metal. There's not much there. There's not much there at all. So you could build an inner box and use fiberglass then. I knew I was going to have to use some kind of insulation. I decided to go ahead and use the outer one. So I'm just using the box here as there was an old shop vac box that I had. But I just use that as a cover right now to contain the fiberglass until I built, a more formal. I'm going to take some sheet metal and do that. So first off, about the insulation. Again, this is just kind of loosely in there. I just picked up a roll, and this is just R13 basic roll of fiberglass insulation. I think it's rated to 1,000, 2,000 degrees or something like that. So the fiberglass aspect isn't going to get hurt at all or jump into flames or anything like that. So anyway, I just bought a roll of this, and this was $20. And as you can see, I have a ton left. So it's done. And if you have any extra or any around the house in your basement or something like that, that'd be a good thing to use. I did not have any extra at the time. So I got that for $20. And then what I did was you can just see, I just kind of wrapped it over the top and the sides. I just took one sheet and unceremoniously just draped it over. I also put a sheet in the back, so it's covering the sides, the two sides, the top and the back. And so I tried it out, and I was only able, I could get to 400, but it was only barely 400. So I wanted to make sure that it could get up to temperature more quickly, it was more efficient, and I was already planning on doing the front and the bottom as well. Well, what I did was I went and got some flashing. So if you go to Home Depot or Lowe's or any of the big box stores like that, you can buy this metal here. And you can buy it actually in two places. You can buy sheets of it, either in the gutter area as flashing. It's not super thick. It's not a high gauge. It's pretty thin, so it's very workable. You can kind of see where I was cutting it on the edge here on the sides. Or you can get it if you go to the AC or the heating duct work. That's actually where I got this piece right here. This was a 16 by 36 piece that I grabbed to do the bottom and the door. So you can kind of see where I tucked in. I took some pictures, but I think this is probably good enough. Basically, this whole wall here is all open, and I basically just took a sheet of it and I cut so that I could tuck it at. A lot of times you'll go in, and I might still do this, put some rivets in there to hold all the metal pieces together. This was a case where on the door I could just tuck it into the edges right around here on the back. So I just kind of cut around. There's a post right there, and so I was just cutting and notching around that, and then the door right there as well. So that worked really, really well. I went ahead and you can see I kind of hooked up my barbecue thermometer here just as a double check. I also have, I probably should have checked the temperature. I did this earlier. So right now the piece is at 235, somewhere in that range. And so that's still retaining the heat. Actually, that's still on. I'll go ahead and turn that off. Probably should have turned that off before. You can kind of see how it gets red hot. So it works really well now. I didn't time it specifically, but it was only about 10 minutes, 12 minutes or something like that. And it had gotten up to, now with the insulation, the walls and the floor, it only took about 10 or 12 minutes. So for the floor, I took most of the thickness. I took a little bit, I took a little thin layer because I didn't want it that thick. And I just kind of laid it down on the ground, on the floor, and then put an extra piece of that flashing right on top of it. So I'm thinking that really helps insulate the bottom as well as reflect some of the heat upward. And it got hot in a hurry. In fact, it went all the way up to 450, and I'm not sure if it might even get hotter than that. I went ahead and turned it off after that. But I'm very, very pleased with how quickly it got hot and how efficient it seems to be with all the insulation. Again, that makes a big difference. I think I've never powder coated. This is what I'm just starting off with. This is going to be my first time. So I was just concerned about it taking very, very long time. And if it takes 10 minutes to go from 370 to 400, well, there's no magical number about the 400 that you generally get to. And if I then wait till it gets to 400 and then wait the 20 minutes or the 15 minutes or whatever that is for it to cure, it's possible I could be over curing it because it already took a very long time for it to get up to 400. So anyway, I just wanted it to get up pretty efficiently and get up there. So more about the dimensions here. So it's hard to determine based on, because a lot of the descriptions will talk about the box or the whole thing. And obviously, if you have some specific size parts, you only care about what's going to be the opening. And they don't generally talk about smokers, I found out, in that particular way. So I'm going to provide some measurements here. So the inside of this is about 15 inches. I can't get it in there, but yes, it's about 15 inches, 15 and a half, somewhere in there. I think its billed as 16, but that's about what that setup is. And the depth of the inside is about 13 and a half. So you can kind of see that there. So that's the space that you have. So I would suggest, measuring out the parts that you're going to be powder coating before you figure out which smoker you want to get and convert, and make sure that it's big enough to hold what you need. Now this was actually the bigger consideration for me. I'm going to put down the camera for a second. Because I have a few, skinnier parts, like I said, the steering column, and that's somewhere close to 24 inches. And that's where you're going to start running into a problem. So notice here the setup of the burner. It's about 4 inches or something. In fact, that flashing there is a little bit above the actual floor of it. The floor of it is actually down at the bottom there. So it's set the way it's bent and constructed about 4 or 5 inches above the floor. So if this is a 30-inch model, start doing the math. And there is only, looking at this, it's only about 25 inches. If I had the angle right. It's only about 25 inches between the heating element and the roof. So whatever you have that's going to be 2 feet is going to be a very, very tight squeeze in there. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do about it at that point. I'm actually thinking, since the burner doesn't care what orientation it is, if I flip over this bottom piece here, if I take this, there's 4 screws in there. If I just flip that over, it's going to add another 6 inches to the height, as long as it doesn't, hit the bottom of it. I'm going to play around with that a little bit for some of those longer pieces, but that's what I'm thinking about doing. Or basically just extending. Again, this is single walled, so if you just take, I'm thinking I can pretty easily get some flashing or something like that that's maybe 6 inches as a strip, cut the top off this thing, and just extend it up that amount so that I can keep the bottom and all that situation exactly the same. I bet it would still get up to 400 based on how fast it got this last time. So just a couple more things about the conversion here. So I did open up this box here. There is like I said, there's a thermostat, or right there, or there's a temperature gauge. It's a little probe that slides in there. So what I did was I took apart this box here, because what that's going to do is, this is not digital, so you don't know what temperature, but it's set to only get up to maybe 300 or something like that. It's going to turn the burner off if it gets too hot, and 400 is definitely going to be too hot. So it's basically going to prevent you, no matter how much insulation you have, it's going to prevent you from getting up to temperature. So it's actually pretty easy. Once you take this box apart, just be very, very careful with the ground wires, as well as some of the other wires and the connections. You can simply just slide the little probe thermometer out of it. I was trying to figure out where else to put it, but then realized that if I just pulled it and it's just sitting inside there, it is going to get some residual heat from the heating element here. In fact, it actually does seem to be working. It just registers the wrong temperature, but it is getting heated up. And that's working perfectly fine. In fact, the setting that I had, let me go ahead and unplug it. The setting I had, I was just messing around with it just for the first time, and I had it down only here. So I had it pretty low, and it was staying stable at about 400, so that must have meant that the little probe was maybe getting 120 or something like that. But if that translates to 400 in the oven, then that basically works. So you can just kind of mess around with that and verify the temperature. Like I said, I use my grill thermometer to in there just to verify, and also I have the laser one, just a couple different ways just to make sure that it's working properly. And then also you notice that there is no, with the door with this flashing on there, this thing is going to read way wrong. Now you can buy for, I don't know, $10 or something like that, one with a probe, a metal one that's probably about that diameter, that you could fashion and just kind of stick through there so it goes through this flashing. In fact, some of the smokers, the Cuisinart has that long probe, and it can stick out here and then actually get a more accurate temperature. I might get one of those at some point, but it's really not that necessary right now. I can figure it out a fair amount. One of the things I want to try to do is just avoid opening up the oven all the time to check the temperature of the piece. So I'm going to try to figure out some kind of conversion or some way that I roughly kind of know when it has got up to temperature, and I can make a pretty good guess at that. Again, I'm just going to go around real quickly, and I think that's pretty much it. That's all the considerations. Again, this is just a box, and my wife is probably going to freak out when she sees it, but again, this is not the intent to keep it like this. But it is interesting that even at 400, I was feeling the top and it was barely warm. Barely warm. All this, I mean, this is way overkill insulation for this type of setup, but it works well. I'm probably gonna, when I make a metal shroud for it, I'll get some bigger pieces of flashing, leave about a 2-inch mark in there and maybe take some of this batting out. But I mean, it'll look relatively finished when I get done. I might do a part 2 of this oven modification when I get there. So I think that's about it. Hopefully that answers any questions or kind of helps out with, the one particular Masterbuilt smoker model that I purchased to make the powder coat oven. So hopefully going to be making a couple videos on my first powder coating, just some of the things I learned from that experience in the next couple weeks.